Hi everyone, my name's Duncan and I'm super excited today to have a friend and a guest today to talk about sharing code with Angular, both between mobile apps and web apps and all sorts of things. Justin, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, hi, how's it going? I'm Justin Schwartenberger. I'm a product manager and educator at nrwhlian. I work with the team there, and we're going to be talking about NX today. Should be cool.
Cool.
I
Yeah,
also I'm also the host of host and maintainer of Angular Air, a video cast about all things Angular. We run that every week on Tuesdays at 11 a.m. Pacific time. Sometimes we alter the time depending on scheduling, but we try and do it every week and bring great Angular content to the community.
Cool. So tell me a little bit about Narwhal. That's a new thing for you. You've joined the Narwhal team. Who are you and what do you guys do?
Yeah, it's a new thing since July. Been there since July. We help enterprise clients and companies be successful with Angular. So we help with training and guidance and solving challenging problems, and then help through the life cycle of delivering applications that are built with Angular to make sure that these teams are successful. These teams operate well at scale and all those good things. Yep.
Cool. So do you have do you become like a nrwhlian? Is there a name for someone who works for Narwhal?
Yeah, so I kind of pushed for us being Narwhalians. It was like Narwhalers was the kind of easy thing that it fell into, but I kind of look at it like as a narwhal as a whale, and whalers are typically people who hunt whales. So I'm like, oh, no, okay, how about we're Narwhalians, right? So we're Narwhalians, and it's our pod. We have a pod of whales, so it's the narwhal pod, and our team is growing. It started with Jeff Cross and Victor Sapkin, and they came from Google and started Narwhal. And then I joined. We have Aizagul with us. We have Tor, and now today we announced that we have Dan with us, who was on the Angular team.
Cool.
Plays with us as well, and we're growing. So it's pretty cool. And it's pretty.
I think that's what makes me go, wow, like this is one cool team. Like half of the team are, ex Angular core team members, and the other half of the team, like yourself, are like super embedded in the community and, add lots of value. So it's like, wow, it's like an all-star team, I guess, not to blow your trumpet.
Yeah. Right now that kind of goodwill and excitement over the Narwhal brand and who we are is pretty high, and that's pretty amazing to be a part of that, right? Hopefully that'll continue. Hopefully we can keep up that mystical prestige about us or excitement. I think it will. I mean, we the team of people that we have, we enjoy interaction with the community. We enjoy helping people. We enjoy helping people find success and engaging with our community and with everybody doing Angular. And so I think that goes a long way for people to be excited about us and what we do. Probably a little bit of extra prestige thrown our way that, I don't know, try and be humble about it. I don't know if it's always warranted, but much appreciated. Yeah. I'm just glad to be a part of it also. Yeah. Cool.
I think you might be blushing a little bit, but that's
a little bit. Yeah. It's but it's really amazing to be able to work with the team of individuals that I'm working with right now, to have this kind of mind meld and this opportunity on a daily basis to interact with people with so much knowledge and experience, and to be around a whole team that has that, and to be able to talk about these advanced Angular things and challenges that come up, and have these discussions around this advanced content with these ideas getting thrown out, and these solutions being made, and these things to learn from one another. It's just that being around those team members and having that interaction is pretty special. One of the reasons why I was excited to come and be a part of it was that opportunity. And I knew that as we grew, hopefully we would draw more of that, and it would just be more and more people that we'd get to work with and learn from, and just have those discussions. It's talk shop. It's exciting.
Yeah, I can imagine you guys would have quite fun geeking out sessions where you're just like, oh, what about this idea? And I guess I'm really excited looking at what you guys are doing, because I'm like, wow, you're very open to share a lot of your stuff. You share all of I know Victor writes a lot of some of the best blogs at the moment around lots of topics around, especially NGRX. I found them super useful as someone who's involved with projects within NGRX, and now you've got this new tool called NX. And so it looks like you guys are very, focused on also not just, getting busy helping clients, but also pushing back and helping the community. So that's really cool.
Yeah, totally. It's funny you mentioned Victor and all his posts, right? It's kind of like Git commits and like the top contributor, right? And I'm going to be hunting for that. I want to get my blog post count up there, so he's not so far in the lead of all these blog posts of content and stuff like that. Because that's my jam, right? Is creating content. I love doing that, so we look forward to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're not only focused on making enterprise teams and clients successful, but we also want that to spill over to the community and help continue to make the community successful, and to share these things that we can share that help the community understand how to do Angular at the next level, right? And distill this knowledge, as well as these patterns and things that we surface and realize, look, we've learned that these challenges that these clients are facing, how can we define that as a pattern that we say, this is how you would solve that, this is how we'd recommend you solve that, and then get that out to everybody, to the community. NX is a good example of that, of being something that we can kind of package in some of these patterns and practices into, generated code that helps the community out to be able to implement those things in the same way, solving these challenging problems that we've seen over and over again, and realize that pattern of, look, this is something that everybody can benefit from having an answer to, or getting help with and support with, and as you know, and all of our team members are active community members for the Angular community, talks and blog posts and meetups and things like that. And that's something that is at the heart of our values of who we are as a company. And so it's something that we're always excited about doing and embracing and providing that through out there as well. So yeah, definitely. So it's pretty cool.
So this NX tool and sharing code has got me really excited, because I've been on this journey. This year has been the year that I've started doing more mobile app development with Ionic, which a lot of people will be aware of as a tool for writing mobile applications with your Angular knowledge that you can compile down to a Cordova application and put on the App Store. And so we've been doing a bunch of that, which has led to the first question, like, oh my God, we have all this Angular code that's almost identical to our web application, and we have to share this. And so that's been a journey for most of 2017 for me and my team, and had several kind of clients who were like, oh, you guys have solved this. Can you come kick off for us and help us solve the same problem? And we've been doing a lot of that with NPM packages because we're like, well, we're used to making NPM packages and we can version them. But it hasn't been super, super easy having like the bulk of your Angular application, be it a mobile app and a web app, and taking all the kind of the logic of those apps except for the views and putting them into a shared library has been kind of tricky. And so I see this new NX tool for sharing code. I'm like, oh, wow, this could actually be a nicer story. And so I'm kind of at the beginning of that journey, so it's super exciting to talk about it. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how NX helps share code and what else is its big picture that it helps solve.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so NX is an open source toolkit for enterprise Angular applications. It basically is built to empower the Angular CLI to take it to kind of like the next level and allow you some of these patterns and practices and things within an Angular CLI project per se, right? And it's really cool because the Angular CLI actually has, built-in support for multiple apps and essentially then multiple libs and things like that. Like the idea of code that's going to be used for multiple apps within a single project, right? That leverages the build tools, the testing tools and things like that all within the one thing. But out of the box, when you generate a new project with Angular CLI, you're generating it with a folder structure that's just for one single app, right? But the Angular CLI JSON file allows you to configure and support multiple apps. So you could do some manual manipulation of your folder structure and then the pathing inside of those things and add more apps to the apps array that's in there and get to what NX is going to do for you for that element, right? But NX does that for you with a simple command, right? So, and leveraging Angular schematics that now the CLI is using to empower all of those generators. When you generate a component, you generate a class, service, that sort of thing. Those are using schematics that dictate how to change the file system and create files or edit files, that sort of thing. And so we're able to leverage that same thing to do these implementations of this change of the Angular CLI JSON file, the setup of the folder structure and things like that, to now give you a way to generate apps quickly, generate new apps with it, and have it out of the box be set up with an app folder structure, apps folder structure, and stuff like that. And then as a result of that, we can generate libs, and libs can be this home for shared code, right? And with Angular and with the concept of NG modules and this breakout of how you can consume and import NG modules in different modules, and it gives you a way to kind of scope code and group code together. Now you kind of have this natural way to say, oh, I'm going to create a new lib, and it's just going to be an NG module, and now that's where that's going to live, and it helps you organize that in a single workspace project. And then from there, you just kind of get almost encouraged to kind of go down that path, because you have a lot of the stuff that is hard decision making already done for you. And so now it's just a matter of ng generate lib, boom, you're up and running, ng generate app, boom, you've got another app, right? And you don't have to think about where do I put that in the folder structure? How does it nest together? That's this other way, and you're just up and rolling. I mean, the same way you do with components, right? Like in an Angular CLI project, and you generate a new component, right? It'll out of the box, based on the style guide, the IO style guide, it's going to create a folder with that component name, and then put the HTML, CSS, or SCSS, whatever you do on that, and the TS file and the spec file all within that folder. And then if you want it in a module, it's going to nest it. Like, it'll make those decisions for you, and you're just on to creating code. And that's kind of what we're trying to do with the workspace side of things with NX.
That's definitely been one of the cool things about learning to use NX for me, is that, like, if you're an Angular dev and you use the Angular CLI, you use it heavily for generating code and architecting everything, and even the namespacing and stuff. So for me, moving to using NX on top of the CLI just felt really simple, because you're like, oh, it's still the same NG. I've just got these extra commands, and I can just run NG app help, and it'll tell me what I can do. And it felt very at home compared to what I'm like. It just felt like using an extension to the CLI, which is really cool. I really liked it. So can you give maybe an example of what it looks like to have these different apps and libraries? Can maybe like an example of an admin and something else, and what would be in the lib folder?
Yeah, totally. So like, you have this concept that, say you have in your application domain per se, right? Or this mono repo kind of concept. You're like, I've got multiple apps. Maybe I have, and like you said, an admin app for managing orders and accounts, and I have a client app for customers that are going to place orders. Let's say like a Starbucks app, right? And the Starbucks client app is where somebody could place the order for their drinks and things like that. And then you have an admin app that allows somebody that works at that company to manage all the accounts that are in there, all those sort of things, keep track of that. Maybe you have a reporting app that has stats and stuff that somebody can log into and check those sort of things, right? And across those apps, you have similar code, and you're sitting there going, okay, I want, connecting to the back end and getting data for, orders, let's say. I want to write some set of code, maybe some services within an NG module, or it could even be just some TypeScript code or some, straight class code that you're going to write that handles connecting to the back end and getting that data and brokering that connection, right? And that the client app's going to use it, the admin app's going to use it, the reporting app's going to use it. So how do you separate that out and be able to share that across those, right? And then also move and iterate fast, as well as keep it up to date across all apps, right? And so that's kind of the heart of this idea of saying, okay, we have a single project, a single workspace. In this case, it becomes a single repository, right? Just like an Angular CLI project is a single repository. You have all that code in there, and you say, I have broken out a backend service into a lib, and it's used by those three apps. And simply in those apps, in the NG module for those apps, I import, if I have my backend service as a provider inside of an NG module that's in a lib, I simply include that NG module in the different apps that I need it. It's there. It's all in the same file structure. The CLI knows the pathing. And, one of the things with the CLI in the past, and actually something that I kind of pushed with Mike Brocky and then eventually with Hans to try and convince him, like, they had this apps array concept in there from like the beginning, but it was a single app, and then they just never had any way to support like actually reading from it and using it. And at my previous job, we were trying to say, like, look, we want to use this. We need this. How can we get this going, right? That we have a use case for it. And I finally got on a call with Hans and showed him an important use case of what we needed. And he's like, okay, I can see let's put some time into it. So now it's in there. And so as a result of that, that's cool, because now we have this ability to have single repo, multiple apps that are related to one another in some fashion, right? They're in that application domain. Right. And now because of that, then everything that the CLI pathing got pushed up all the way up to like the root level of where your Angular CLI project is. So now it's aware throughout any directory structure that you have in there. So you really can make whatever you want from there down, right? Now, in our case, we make an apps folder and a libs folder with NX, and then each of those have multiple apps in it or multiple libs in it, and this app can import from the libs that's over here, and the pathing will be able to go up and down and understand all that. Yeah. Some of that magic with the libs is done through TypeScript and configuring the tsconfig file for some pathing that we can get like shorter path names to your libs. So as we create like a lib, it will create a new entry. When we create the NX workspace, it'll create an entry for whatever your name of the workspace is that you gave it, /libs. And then when you do import statements in your apps, you can import modules from the libs with just like if your workspace is called NX demo, it'd be at NX demo /libs would be your import my module, backend module from at NX test /libs, right? So that makes that part easier.
You make it sound really a small deal, because I know that like from playing around trying to go, I'm just going to have this folder with some Angular code in it that's outside of the context of the CLI. It's not like it ends up in a mess of file paths and TypeScript and telling TypeScript, hey, TypeScript, make sure you're aware of this folder, but also don't forget my other folder and this folder. And so that sounds awesome to have all of that glued in there.
See, that's the magic of it. That's the fact that like, what's exciting about it is it's built upon the Angular CLI. And so CLI provides a lot of that power and opportunity, right? And so NX is finessing and configuring it to get it all dialed in. There's things you could manually do if you needed to, right? You could go in there and manually create the same scenario that NX is creating for you in terms of the workspace setup, right? It's just we're doing all that plumbing for you with NX to make it real easy for you to do that. And then to make it real easy for you to repeat that, right? To generate a new lib, to generate a new app. You're probably going to generate more libs than apps, but you can do that really fast, and then all that plumbing is set up for you, so you don't have to do that manual thing. But under the hood, it's all just the Angular CLI and leveraging the power of what it provides, which is super awesome.
Yeah, well, I mean, at my work, I'm always the guy who gets lumped with being the one who fixes all the Angular builds, because that's all I do is Angular. So across different clients and teams, being a consulting shop, you have to go fix someone's bespoke Webpack build or .NET Core build and not CLI build. And it's easy to scaffold an application, but it's super expensive for our teams to maintain these applications. And those ones that are built on the CLI are very fast, very cheap to upgrade. They might be 2 to 4 hours to take to the new version for a large application. Whereas if it's a custom build, that can be a lot longer, or if you're implementing a new pattern. So the fact that it sits on top of the CLI for me is just music to my ears, because I'm like, so much easier to keep a project like close to the tip of master without having to think, another custom build. Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. So then with to kind of circle back with the question about with the libs and when you make the libs and stuff like that. So obviously when you want to share code across different apps, you create the libs that provide you an easy way to do that, right? And to reuse that code. Same way with components. I mean, even down to something like the concept that Angular Material does, right? With the latest versions of Angular Materials, they've broken out each component into its own ng module. So you could bring in a single component. So you don't have to take in and say, give me the material module with all the components, even though I use just the tabs component. You have the ability to import the ng module that's just for the tabs component. Well, you can certainly recreate that. You can create a brand new lib with NX, right? And for your tab component or your card component, whatever it may be, and make an ng module for it and have the same sort of setup that's really easy to reuse that component. And then you can compose those together. So it's not only about composing libs inside of apps, but you can compose libs inside of libs, right? So you could have our shared component library that has imports all these individual ng modules that are just one component ng module into that, and then consume that ng module of all of your shared components into into an application as well, just depending on how you need to scope the reusability of your stuff, right? If you have this packet of that say like a table details with some modal stuff, and it's like that's going to be used across 3 apps. Well, you can build a lib that kind of packages all this up in its own ng module, and then use those in all 3 and have that reusability.
Yeah. So that's interesting. So how small do you, like, if I'm thinking of your workflow and you go, okay, I'm making this admin page that has a list of products, and then I make a public facing one that has a list of products, and then I'm going to make this, shared table for both of those. Would you make that its own module, or would you bundle that module with the service? Like, how small do you go? Do you just instantly make a module for everything, a lib for everything, or how do you think about, this lib should have this, this, and this, or do you just make a lib for everything?
Yeah, I think it's like you want to be small. You want to make those things small, easy to maintain, easy to manage sort of things. And you certainly can do that with libs and just go super fine granular pieces and then compose them together. But I think there's probably a balance there that happens. I mean, now you need to start bringing those in. What about ones that are, kind of relying upon another one, or you just really wouldn't use it without the other one? Do you really want to have it floating out there as a standalone thing? Let's say you have a service and a component and some state, and they're relative to a concept, right, or a feature, something that together is something that you use, right? But if you were to say we're going to ditch that concept, right, you'd want to clean all that up. Well, if they were individuals, there's a chance that you would clean up 2 of the 3, and then the other one would just sit around and it would be in there forever. And, so how do you have that mental model of that association of what is it that we're accomplishing with this chunk of code? And then how much should it be grouped together to where it can move around or can go away all in one swoop, so nothing gets left behind, or how much is it that you need to reuse those pieces? And I think an interesting thing with that comes out of that too is that with this libs concept and these apps and the way we do the TS config stuff for importing these things, we have this natural kind of public API sort of thing that arises out of it. We generate a lib that has an index TS file that exports, the module right off the bat. But then you have to go in there and you have to specify, I want to export this service, or I want to export this component, in order for it to play nice when you import it somewhere else, when you want to use it in an app. But it's going to allow you to do things like, I have a service that's for the backend that nobody needs to use outside of the ng module that runs the backend. That's not part of a public API. Well, I just don't export it from the index.ts for that lib. And now when somebody goes try and include it, it's almost like the same way you would go and if you try and use something from the Angular library that's too deep, right? That's not a public API. You'll get a warning that like that path is not reachable, that sort of thing. We can surface that gets surfaced in your editor saying that, you're trying to access something that's not public essentially. And so now you can kind of have more control over what that lib is. So I think that maybe some of that comes from then saying, okay, well, these things would go in that module and they wouldn't go outside because I wouldn't make them public facing. So that's when they're grouped together. And maybe the things that are public facing dictate when we want to have their own libs for them.
Yeah. That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. So I imagine like if you think about the average Angular 5 or where we're up to today with Angular project, it tends to be very much feature based. So you would have a feature folder for products, for example, and a feature folder for users and so forth. So do you see a lot of libs taking that pattern where you have a lib for users and a lib for products that are kind of like feature folders, or is it usually more broken down than that?
No, we've done that, and I think that's definitely part of a pattern that you can do, especially when you start talking about like lazy loading, right? And lazy loading that feature with a route, and you have that as that's your lib, right? It's just kind of standalone. It's it allows you to kind of focus and drill in on that particular chunk of code when you're working on it. I think another benefit of that is that it doesn't take on the folder structure of your application. So saying that like I think when we dive in and build Angular application and we're in a single Angular application and we start thinking about, okay, do we start making feature folders, right? So we start making feature folders, orders and profile and blah, blah, blah. And maybe those are our destination of our routes, but then we start having sub routes, child routes off of that, yearly orders or whatever. Then you're like, okay, well, do I make another folder down inside of that feature folder? Do I put it aside? Do I like you start doing a bunch of like folder wrangling to figure out like what's my tree structure? Where am I going to put these things to make it make sense in there, right? But when you bring them out to the libs, then they're flattened. Then it's like I may use it this 3 routes deep, 3 children route deep, or I may move it up to the top route. But now the file folder structure is out of play, and I'm not having to worry about that. And so I think it kind of reduces the friction. Not only when you go to plan to implement it, but also when you go to refactor and move it around, like you kind of take that out of the equation because these things just sit, flat. Does that make sense?
Yep. That makes a lot of sense because I know, not using NX, but using an NPM package to share code, we end up in this interesting situation between these apps where, we're just really got routing and modules that pull in other modules, and they become much more like a shell, these apps. And they're more like an app that just coordinates all this shared logic between them, which is so much fun when you're coding because you're just like, wow, I spun up a new app and used all this shared logic really fast and shared tests and all the goodness around that. So that makes a lot of sense. And I can imagine you wouldn't, I guess that's a good question is, do you share your routes? Do you put your routes in these libs or do they tend to never make it in there?
Yeah, I think that's something that's a little bit challenging, right? Is thinking about, okay, well, how specific? I mean, there's that level of going, oh, well, the libs are shared code, so it's only things that I'd want to have in multiple apps, right? But then there's also that thing we just talked about, which is the libs kind of give you a nice place to organize those things in a flat structure where now, depending on where you use it, even if you use it in a single app, it makes it easier to refactor and flex around and do that stuff. And then makes that app a lot cleaner, right? But in that scenario, we're talking like a 1-to-1, right? This lib is for this app. And so how do you then kind of have that concept of saying, well, this thing lives in the libs, but I really hope that somebody else doesn't build a new app and use it over there because it's kind of routing specific for that, right? And I don't know. I mean, I think that's, just part of a architecture challenge. And maybe at that point, some of that is, okay, well, what works well for my application domain and what we're building versus maybe what you're building and how do you kind of do that stuff? I think that's probably a product of, it takes you so far and then you still have other application architecture stuff that you need to do, right? or we need to do to figure out it's not not going to give us all the answers, but
it's not magical.
Right.
Fully magical. It's mostly magical.
Most magical, yeah. And I think it's a trade-off, that we have just with everything that we do in programming and development. It's, okay, I'm going to get some benefits out of this, but there's also going to be some stuff. It's not going to be perfect, right? So I have to just kind of pick the one that fits the best for me, that's closest to what we get the most benefit probably out of, right? And maybe the flattened libs are going to give us the most benefit because we can flex a lot of stuff easier. But then, yes, there's this little caveat that we have to work around, right? Versus the opposite, which is, man, when we have to when we have to build out that folder structure or change things around, there's a lot of work in that. And so maybe that's just the trade-off's better the other way.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that's been really big for us in sharing code is NGX and being able to use that as a system for coordinating events and sharing code versus coming up with our own way of doing it. And I know that's a part of NX that's quite a big front center piece. Do you want to talk about NGRX and what it is and how it helps NX and sharing code? And is it an afterthought, or are you guys like, no, you should use NGRX? Where does Narwhal sit with that?
Yeah, so we love NGRX, or are highly encouraging of using NGRX. We think it solves a lot of problems. It solves a lot of architecture challenges, and helps that architecture be better and tackle some of these challenging scenarios. I think that, along with the same concept, so NX provides not only the workspace setup, right, and this configuration of your Angular CLI and the generation of apps and libs within the Angular CLI, but it also provides a library of code. One being, it provides some schematics for generating code in patterns that we recommend, and we'll talk about with the NGRX stuff. We generate some of the boilerplate for NGRX states and feature states and things like that. But then it also comes with a lib of code like data persistence that helps you implement things like fetching data and optimistic and pessimistic concurrency issues and race conditions. It helps implement these patterns, with some bits of code that you just use that then can keep you out of these things that we see occurring when people just kind of hand architect, building out their state and then syncing their client state and their persistent state with their server state and getting those aligned. So you query something from the backend, or you make a request to update some data, and then you need to get that done within your client application state as well. And then like two requests come in at the same time, there's some lag or delay, like the race conditions and concurrency issues and things like that occur. We've implemented some code in the shared library that comes with when you create a project with NX that you can leverage and use to kind of keep yourself out of those scenarios, right? And the cool thing about that is that that's actually a library that is a scope package that you could actually put into your own Angular CLI application. Like, you don't have to have a NX workspace generated project in order to use that. You could just pull down that particular scope package at nrwhl/nx and add that to your existing CLI and leverage that data persistence logic, right? Same way you could actually do the schematics, and you could bring in at nrwhl/schematics into your existing Angular CLI project and configure your Angular CLI JSON file to set those schematics as the default schematic. And now you could have the same schematics and everything, right? There'll be a little, if you're trying to do the apps and libs, it'll require your folder structure to be apps and libs. But the rest of the stuff, so like NGRX, right? Talk about NGRX, and that's something that we buy into a lot and see in terms of a big thing being that it allows you to take your application logic and state and pull it out of the components and services and kind of give it its own home, right? So now your components can really be something that is only concerned about reacting to changes in the application state, and then making requests, send out message requests to make some change to some state, like it initializes that, or it sends off that action and tells it, here's the thing I want you to change in the state. And that's all these components that care about at that point, and you leverage then the store to be this, essentially what it becomes. It's like, you may have multiple services, right, that you build up over time, a service to get accounts, a service to get orders, a service to get, your favorites. And you start finding that you have a component that needs to display bits of all three of those. So then you end up bringing in, injecting all three of those services and then wrangling that all together. And where does the logic sit for updating those? And now you play with all of these services everywhere within these components, or you end up doing stuff like having parent-child components where you're passing things down with inputs and outputs, passing things down and up, and then you implement another component in that component tree to make it deeper, and now you're just flowing it all the way through. And so you do all this architecture with that, and what the store is allowing you to do in NGRX really is allowing you to take all of that stuff and kind of just bundle it up into one domain, this application state, and you do it all in here, and then these components, wherever they sit in the tree, however deep they are, or however new ones you add or move around, they just contact the central thing to get all that done, right? And then of course it's observable based, so then you get to leverage, observables and get some performance scenarios out of that with push on push for change detection and the async pipe, and so it just it solves a lot of these architecture challenges that I think that people start to get in as they develop more with Angular and their
Yeah.
application, fills out. I think it's something that I know I'm trying to kind of tell more people about and kind of promote that. I think there's a lot of talk that people get the explanation that, oh, NGRX is the single source of truth, and kind of the explanation of what it does is the state thing like Redux. But there's not a whole lot of talk right out the gate to new people about what does it solve, right?
Yeah,
And it's
yeah,
this
yeah.
component coupling that we end up with the inputs and outputs and with the multiple instances of services that's what NGRX allows you to do is decouple your components.
Yep.
And because Angular is such you're relying on this component tree that gets built out, right? And I think over time you change that tree a lot because you're refactoring things. You decide to make a component out of this thing in the middle, and you decide to move these things around. And the less friction you have in there, the easier it is to move those things around, and the simpler your components are. I think the easier that is, and NGRX provides that way to do that.
Yep. I think NGRX is a big topic, and I think it's a big commitment for a team to take. But I think once you've taken that jump and your team have done it once, I think you're much better armed for it. You're more likely to use it more and more and see the benefits for it. It's tricky to articulate, I've found, to say, watch me make some small piece of state with NGRX and I make 8 files, and people go, whoa, what did you just do? All I had to do was get a list of customers and you got 8 files? Oh my God. And everything's backwards compared to their normal flow of just mutating state in the component and updating the list right there and there and just injecting what they need straight up. So it definitely, I think, has huge potential for a lot of teams, and we've been using it quite a lot. So I'm interested, do you guys use it with all your projects? Say out of the last 5 or 6 projects, have you used it every time, or do you sometimes use it, NGRX?
Yeah, we try. I mean, we support clients, and so it's kind of dependent upon what they want to do, right? But a lot of times we see if they're not using it, we see, look, you have some problems in here, you have some challenges that you're facing that this could solve, right? This could make your world a lot easier to work with that and can do that. So we can encourage you down that path, right? But yeah, so I think that kind of depends upon that. I mean, certainly like our own things, anything that we build, we lean towards it because we know that's the solution. And like with NX, with the generator, with the schematic that we have for NGRX, we'll generate those 8 per se files right for you, so you can get up and running. So you can generate a new application state, you can generate a new feature state, and it'll create the actions, the reducers, the interface files, the init file for your initial state, the effects file for your effects, and then we'll add the module registration for those as well. So it kind of takes away that boilerplate work that you got to do, and then it's always consistently creating those in the same manner, right? So it gives you a pattern for.
I actually think that's more important. Hey, like it's more important for our teams to say, okay, it saves you time with the boilerplate, but it's more important that everyone's doing it the same. And that when people are learning, they're learning best practices, because quite often in the last few months, there's 1 or 2 people on the team who know it, and the other people are just learning from what they see in the code base. So having best practices scaffolded out for you is amazing to have that. Especially I find, like, as you go into this structure, like we started off, we did kind of one giant store, and everything was just initialized up front when you loaded your main app module. And now we only lazily load all our pieces of state with the new versions of NGRX, and that opened up a whole new can of worms of like, well, when do we lazy load it? And how do we lazy load it? Do we do it with the route, or do we just do it with the module? And NX, I could see, could really help with those decisions, because you're like, well, I'm going to make a new piece of state. I'll stick it in a lib, and then I'll lazy load it with the lib, or unless you're going to tell me I'm doing it wrong. No,
that's yep. Yeah, I mean, that's it, right? And it makes that process easy. And because under the hood, these libs are created as an app inside of the Angular CLI, everything's, the apps and the libs are registered as under that apps array inside the Angular CLI JSON file, meaning that all of your generator commands could target that with a simple saying -a, which is the shorthand for app, -a equals, and then whatever the name of the thing is, right? So your libs have a name, your apps have a name, so you can generate components, you can generate NGRX for
Mm-hmm.
inside of a lib or inside of an app, however you need to do it. And it's really easy to do all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, yep. And then,
I definitely found that. I definitely found the commands took I feel like I had like some mastery over my NG commands, and then now I'm using NX. I'm like, okay, now I'm like next level, because it's like NG generate a dash, but put it in this module, but load it with NGRX, but put it in this shared. And so I feel like I'm like just getting my head around the new set of commands off the top of my head without having to go back and forth to your guys' docs. But it's pretty cool. It's kind of this next level kind of ability to scaffold code in a really cool way.
Yeah.
One thing I found really tricky and haven't found too much demo code for is doing this idea of, okay, so I've got these Angular apps and I'm using the Angular CLI and the Angular compiler and everything works sweet and the tests all run across multiple code bases, and it actually was pretty straightforward. If you've already done NGRX, using NX to me was just felt really logical. But then I went to make a mobile application, because we've been doing that with shared NPM packages for putting this code, like this core code in between a mobile and a web app. And then I was like, so with NX, how do I get like a lib from NX into this Ionic application? And that's not hard, but how do I run this Ionic application? And when all of these sorts of questions pull up. So I know I've seen some stuff on Egghead.io that's awesome about using the alternative native scripts to Ionic. That's great and really helps me. But is that something the team are going to move towards, or is that something that you've got examples of?
So we don't really have any examples that we put out for that. We're just still kind of getting started with NX and getting some of the initial core functionality that figured out and added more to it, that sort of thing. But I think as we move forward here into the next year, we'll have some more stuff that we can put out there that will showcase it more, right? Example apps and things like that. But I think a lot of it, because it's really this layer, empowering the Angular CLI, a lot of the answers could potentially be there already, because really what it is you've got an Angular CLI project at the end, and it's just scaffolded it out, it's built it out, it's configured it, but that's what you're sitting with, right? And then it's code generation stuff to get code into that Angular CLI project, and it's some shared library code that's available just like any other NPM package that you have in there, right? So really what you're dealing with at the end of the day is an Angular CLI project. And so if an Angular CLI project has some way to support, like with NativeScript, I believe there's examples out there of how to set up the NativeScript build within an Angular CLI project, right? Yeah. That same thing could be done with an NX workspace project, because all it is an Angular CLI project, just configured for multiple apps. And so, I think a lot of that, those answers are possibly already out there if there's something done with the Angular CLI. And if they're not, and they get created to use with the Angular CLI, then you have essentially the same thing already with NX, just maybe some pathing differences and things like that. But yeah, I think that's one of the exciting things about it is it's not its own new giant, different thing, right? And a lot of the questions we get, it's interesting because we get some issues filed on GitHub, and we're kind of going through those. And a lot of the answers to a lot of them are just like, you just do it like the CLI, right? You just do it. You have to send in, the -a or the -app equals flag option flag in when you do ng generate component, and that will allow you to target this other thing, or ng build, or people asking, how do I deploy an app within the NX workspace? Well, it's the same way you would go through the deploy process for the Angular CLI. You build it out, you do a build, it builds to your dist directory, wherever you set that up, and you just grab that and go. And so all of those things are, NX doesn't put you in any scenario where you can't do any of those. It's essentially the same, story.
I think that's a real take home from me. What I'm hearing today is that, if I'm having problems, my first thought is to go, well, what is everyone doing with the CLI in the community to solve this problem? And that's where I'm probably going to find my answers. And this might be a decision where if someone's very new to deciding between NativeScript and Ionic, they might go down the NativeScript path because it maybe has a bit more kind of community around using the CLI with it. Because I know with Ionic, most of my experience and what I've seen is they've got their own awesome CLI and their own awesome code generator. And, it's very much built to own that folder where that Ionic project is for doing mobile apps. And even so much so, if you try and build and, produce your Apple IPK and so forth, it's going to expect to find a node modules folder to pull all those things from. So if you try and stick those node modules outside of that workspace, it's going to complain. So, but it wasn't something that was difficult for us to get around, and maybe it's something that we can share what we've done, similar to Nathan's done on Egghead.io with the native scripts version, because I stole a lot of his stuff because it's only 2 videos. If you haven't seen it, it's a really awesome demo of NX. He's great. But so we basically made a new folder outside of the apps folder, and we just we said Ionic start, and it makes you an Ionic application, and let Ionic master that folder. But then what we did is we trying to follow this monorepo approach where we share all the dependencies. So it has its own node modules folder, but a lot of those if those node npm packages in the node modules folder for the Ionic app are shared with any of the Angular stuff, then we've pointed those paths in the package.json for npm to those ones and tried to have it as shared as possible. And that got us around that. But then there was another challenge around unit tests, because unit tests expect to build the Ionic app. It's very different to building an Angular app. We got around that, but then when you run the tests, but it's pretty sweet where we're up to, and it was only me and my buddy Phil probably spent a half a day on it to get it there, and it works really well. So maybe we can share that. It's very similar to what the native script story, but it seems to be a little bit separate than using the CLI, just because it runs on its own.
Yeah, that'd be cool. It sounds real similar to, like, let's say you want to have a server application in this scenario, right? And you're like, well, where do I put that? And you could have a server folder the same level as the apps and libs, and maybe that has its own, node scripts or TS stuff and everything that you want to run with that. And now you're just, okay, well, how would I incorporate that within an Angular CLI project and pull that off, something that's been done? And you can do that same sort of thing in here. And so it's, you just have some other thing running a little bit different than not really leveraging the CLI process, the Angular CLI process stuff, right? For the build and thing and Webpack and things like that. It has its own thing, but it's in a project that's like an NPM project with a package JSON, and there is these TS config files and some of the things that you have, if you're writing in TypeScript, the Angular CLI project already has TypeScript installed, so you can leverage that already and stuff like that. And so you can fit that into there, pretty easily. There's nothing stopping you from having other, build architecture within an Angular CLI project, right?
Especially if it's going to be TypeScript. If you've got a backend that's not in C# or Java that needs to be deployed with some special sort of tool chain in a different stack, because the project that I'm starting this week, which will go on for about a year, is going to be using a lot of Google serverless, so a lot of Firebase functions and other sorts of things. So we've actually got exactly what you said, where we have a functions folder, and inside of there are all our functions that can leverage a lot of those shared libraries and tests and other sorts of things. But I guess that kind of brings us onto this discussion, and I feel like I'm on this new journey to think about mono repos. It's not something I've really done in the past, going, I'm going to stick it feels like my company and everyone around me has been going away from this, let's fracture everything and let's have microservices for everything. And it's kind of been a bit brain bending to think, well, no, they're still microservices. It's got nothing to do with that. It's just that they're all the code's in the same folder and they all stay close together. So maybe, do you want to just talk about monorepos and how and why NX is kind of following that monorepo path?
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's certainly a challenge, like you say, in terms of what do you pick and what do you go down, and obviously they both approaches have their own kind of trade-offs, right, sort of thing. But for us, we've focused a lot on these enterprise clients that have large-scale teams, right? Large-scale applications. They have multiple applications and large teams, and how do they manage all that stuff across all of that domain, right? And having individual projects and individual repos and coordinating that and getting the latest version for each one across teams and that rely on it, and then not getting that to break and all those things, those are all these challenges that come, I guess, as you grow and have this large code base as well as these large teams. And the monorepo is something that these companies, Google and stuff like that, have used in order to solve that scenario, and then they figured out a pretty good pattern for doing that. And so I think it kind of gravitates for us because of the clients that we're working with and the things that we're trying to solve, right? As well as being, Jeff and Victor coming from the Google team and having strong experience with that and stuff. And so this is how it solves that, right? But I do think there's, opportunity there. It doesn't mean that you have to necessarily be a large company with large amount of apps to take upon that same approach and get benefit from it. Like you mentioned with the microservices, but just doing in one thing. I mean, I think that one of the things, like when you have this mono repo or this application domain single project that has all of the bits to it, you get these benefits out of it that become challenging when you don't have that, right? For say, something as simple as a shared library, right? And you're like, I've got this shared code and it's this backend service and I want to have it available to two different apps, right? Well, if they're in separate repos, I got to coordinate. Do I publish that backend lib to NPM and then everybody consume it from there? And if I do, then I need to make a simple change, like just a name change to a method or even something internal in that library. But now I need to build it, get it all passing, deploy it before I can even start consuming it in these other things, right? And then I kind of have to version it and get it out there in order for these guys to consume it in this separate repo, right? Whereas if it's in a single project, you're like, I can go make that code change. I can go use it over here automatically, see it working, less friction to get up and going really quick and experience that change. I can also refactor across that because our editors and IDEs have awareness of the entire workspace, right? So I change a method in that backend service to be called, instead of get, to be called get orders by ID, and I make that change, and our editors or ID can find all those places that the apps that use it, the other libs that use it, make that change, right? And then from there, I make a commit that has all of those changes in one single commit that fixes or aligns all the apps across my domain into one commit. Something goes wrong, I can roll back that commit. It'll roll back all the changes to all the apps, and now we're back in the previous stable state across our entire application domain for that code, right? Whereas if you said, I deployed this package that's a separate library, and I started implementing these apps, and everything seemed good, and then I deployed it out to production, all these apps, and it's all good, and crap, there's a problem. How do I roll back, right? I got to roll back that version of the lib, but now there's 3 apps that use that version, so I got to put them back to the old version. I got to roll all those apps back with all of their commits back to some other state, roll this one back. It's that coordination that becomes challenging, and maybe you don't have that, so it's maybe not as advantageous, but I think it's certainly easy to get into that, even if you're a small team. Or even if you have, a single app with multiple shared libs or multiple just organized libs across that, it's, or even like an app and a server side, right? And then they coordinate together for some scenario. I mean, I think that those are things that you might start looking at. Here's a benefit of like a mono repo type of approach or a single application domain approach, sort of thing.
It's been fascinating listening to everybody talk about it. I know on Angular Air, the podcast you run, and Adventures in Angular, the other podcast, and Jeff Whipley's been a really awesome source of information about, mono repo versus many repos. And it's interesting how polar it's been, watching from the outside, trying to make decisions. Should I go down this mono repo path? And people are like so black and white sometimes. They're like, I've done micro repos is the way and it's perfect, and mono repos is the way and it's perfect. So it kind of almost feels like whatever's in the middle doesn't work, but when you go to the outsides, it seems to be good. But it feels like a culture shift for our teams, like to say, okay, we're going to always stay up to date. We're not going to have a version of this package that's different in 2 different projects. That all the projects are going to, correct me if I'm wrong here, that's kind of the idea here in this mono repo, is that both applications, say your admin with products and your public facing site with products, they're going to be using a version of, say, a Moment.js, and they're both going to, if you update Moment.js, they're both going to be sharing that library, and then if you've got your own product service, they're both going to get the same update. So you kind of, everyone has to be on board and move together. Is that kind of right?
Yeah. And then that's one of those trade-offs that you look at and say, is that fit for what we're doing or not? Maybe if I have a three legacy apps and a bunch of new apps, and some of those legacy ones have to run on an old version of Moment.js because it's too much of a thing to try and update those to support a new version, then maybe it's not a good fit, right? Maybe you need some other scenario. But you want to do something like true continuous integration. Alex Eagle has a great post about the monorepo, and he talks about that and talks about like this concept of the true continuous integration of all your systems. You need to have this ability that they're all coordinated on the same thing, and you can release it all and instantly, right? And they're all on the same path, sort of thing. So I think it's a benefit. It can be a benefit if that fits your entire model. It could be a struggle if you have different scenarios where it can't, and it's just kind of up to us to figure out, what's a good home for that. What are our challenges, and where do we want to be? And just like everything, it's like a quote I had for my talk last year at NGConf, where I said it's like we're constantly trying to put queen size sheets on a king size bed, right? When we do development of anything, right? So it's like we pull it on one side, it looks great. You go to the other side, it didn't quite fit, right? And we're just tugging back and forth. And all these decisions that we make across, whether it's monorepo, single repo. I mean, you talk about it. Everybody gets a lot of people get fanatical about, oh, that's not the way to go. That's not the way to go. But I mean, this whole world that we just live in, it's like you're doing trade-offs. I mean, it just is. It's just there's so much complexity to the things that we build, to the things that we do. It's not just down to one small single pure function that you're writing. It's a coordination of all this stuff. And so with that, you've got to give and take. And I think this monorepo, multiple repo scenario is the same thing. And you do you and make whatever fits your thing. Go for it. And here's the benefits of this, and here's the drawbacks, and you just evaluate those and go with what feels good.
Is that a decision maker for if a team is going to use NX or not? Like, is it you have to do monorepo, or is it that you might have a mini monorepo, which is just two Angular apps that is a monorepo within an architecture of many repos? Is it a showstopper for a team to choose NX?
I think that's a great question, and I think it's a great opportunity to kind of describe that. And what for me, my excitement over NX is the fact that at my previous work, I tried to architect, with that multiple apps within the CLI, just this concept of just a small application domain. We actually were using it really with kind of like having a single, our main app, and then Playground for Angular, which is a way to work components in isolation together, to be its own app as well. So we just had two apps, right? But really the other app was kind of supporting the main app. So it really wasn't truly a multiple app scenario, but we wanted to have it all in one project, right? And it was getting that folder structure rearranged from what comes out of the box of the CLI to be able to then do that and go from there. And so because NX is just giving you that folder structure right out the gate, giving you a home for those things, and then giving you some schematics to help creating new libs quickly or new apps quickly. And then everything else from there is just straight CLI stuff, right? Straight. And then the helper, the NGRX stuff is, if you just use it in one app, don't ever put it in libs, you just use it in one app. Again, you could bring in at nrwhl/nx into your existing CLI project and leverage the code, the shared code. You can bring in nrwhl/schematics in and use the schematics. You don't have to have multiple apps. You don't even have to have multiple libs. All that stuff is just, on its own. So because of that, it's, we're trying to solve a problem with NX for the enterprise. We're trying to solve a solution for the enterprise things. But I really see it personally as something that, I would make my new apps, even if it's just going to be a single app, as an NX workspace, because it gives me a libs directory, gives me an apps directory in case I ever want to have another app. I'm just configured out of the box right away in the setup that I kind of ideally want to be at. That it's hard to make. It's a little bit of a challenge to make that if you decide down the road, you're like, I want to have a libs folder, right? Or I want to have a folder, or I want to have multiple apps. What do you got to do to your project? There's a lot of manual stuff. You can get there. We've done it, but it's a lot of work to get there, right? So this just puts you in a scenario that's like, I feel is a great fit right off the bat that allows me to extend if I want to, or I can just ride with one app. And even if I just write with one app and just make libs and keep a lot of that code in libs and not in the app, and the app becomes a little simpler, it's easier to maintain that in the libs, and just gives me a folder organization and structure that I think fits well for any app. So it really doesn't, I don't think it matters whether you want to go monorepo a bunch of apps or you just have the one app. I think it's just a great enhancement to the Angular CLI project.
Yep. Okay. And what's the future of NX? Where are we going to be this time next year?
Wow, that's a long ways out. Like that,
okay,
that's
like 65% in JavaScript years. So let's wind it back. Where are we going to be next week? No,
that's like waterfall approach or something, right? So I think like next week, right? This sprint. What are we doing this sprint, right?
That's
approach,
more
right?
like where will we be tomorrow? Far enough.
Yeah. So one of the things we're working on is, we started releasing some new versions of NX, and there's a couple changes that we decided to make, and so when we make those changes, like, how do we align people to the next version or get them to the next, if something changed in a folder structure or something, right? How do we get that? And so we're working on an upgrader that you could run like a command, say, ng generate NX update or something like that, like those terms that would then align you with if NX is on version 0.3.0 and you were 0.1.0, and we know the specific changes that need to realign your workspace to get you there, we'll run that for you, right? So that's one of the things that we got kind of in the pipe. I think the whole Bazel story and how that's unfolding, and when that becomes something that's production ready or team ready for people to use as a build system, how we can incorporate that as a potential option for building these things. For people that don't know about Bazel, it's this build system that Google has internally. It named something different, but their public facing one is Bazel. I'm not sure the exact pronunciation. We'll get to the bottom of that. But it's it's going to help you build and relationships between the builds of these things. So I think when we have something like these libs, these multiple libs that you're creating, and you make changes to just a single lib, you want just that lib chunk to be rebuilt, right? And anything that references it to know maybe that needs to be rebuilt because this one did. And so you're like micro rebuilds of things, pieces as you work on them. And right now with Angular CLI, it's rebuilding an app and anything that the app relies on or imports or uses. If you're ng serving it with a watch or that sort of thing, right? It's just rebuilding all of that at once, and that's gotten a lot faster. So there's been a lot of improvements with that, with the Angular build process as well as the CLI, and so we're getting closer to fast builds. But Bazel can kind of help you with that as well, and so once that unfolds, I think how we can leverage that within NX, and there's some configuration I think you have to do with Bazel to get those defined, and so probably going to have some schematics if we go down that route that will help you configure that or build that, right? And then I think more
big teams, like a team that's got like hundreds of thousands of lines of code. This is kind of something you'd be looking at versus a small to medium application using Bazel. It would be more for a bigger team, or do you think it will become the default for even small projects?
Yeah, I think I have a little bit limited knowledge on Bazel, so I don't know the exact answer. But my feeling is that it's something that it's the as you get larger and you have more stuff to build, like that's when you want to leverage and cut that thing down. But I don't know the exact recommendation on whether it's big or small. But so
cool.
Yeah, so things like that, and then I think other things that we discover that are patterns and practices, generated code, the schematics. What are other things that we can generate that's helpful, that people are doing on a regular basis, that can kind of get you started with patterns. But I think probably one of the other things that we'll be looking at sooner than later would be more kind of like this linting and code checking sort of scenarios that can kind of run as part of the project that will confirm you're doing things right. Like some way to confirm that lazy loaded routes are registered correctly, and then everything's set up so that because if you've done a lazy loaded route, you're putting in this string to a module, right, and the module name, and there's really not, necessarily anything that's confirming that you did that right until you run it right at runtime to see what's going on. And so if we can take and write some stuff that will run that will be able to identify and understand your code and say, oh, this is going to work, or oh no, you're kind of, that's not going to, you maybe need to tweak that. Those sort of confirmations they can then.
That'd be really cool, because every time I write a lazy loaded module, I'm like, oh, that magic string, I hope I got it right. So that would be really cool.
Right.
So I have a silly question before we wrap up. What does NX stand for?
Narwhal extensions.
Narwhal extension.
Narwhal extensions,
so
yeah.
We can expect more extensions in the future. Not
possibly,
just,
possibly, or maybe they just all fall under the NX, moniker.
Just all under the one NX. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah.
I can't believe we got this long into it without me asking.
Yeah. Yeah.
So. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So where should people go if they're interested in learning more about NX? Where are the docs? What's their first steps?
Okay. So we got a bunch of information on our website. So nrwhl.io/NX. And that's where we have a lot of introduction to what it's about, a little short video, some guides on how to do, how to run the NGRX schematic and the different options for that, how to use the data persistence library and how to do, optimistic and pessimistic updates and things like that. So that's really the home. Then we have the repo for the project itself. That's on GitHub. github.com/nrwl/NX, I believe. And you can get to that there and check that out. See, file issues if you have issues. Check out what releases are and things like that. Explore the source code. That's always fun. I recommend you do that, especially with like the data persistence stuff and that lib. I think people should check that out because there's some RxJS stuff that's going on there with operators and things like that show how those things are pulled off that are pretty interesting to learn from. So you should check that out. And then our blog.nrwhl.io. We're constantly putting up new blog posts. I had one recently that I put up there about how NX helps teams modularize their code and encourage that, making new libs. So we've got content coming out through there as well about NX. And then hopefully more community content. You mentioned Nathan put out a video for using DataScript and NX and stuff. And so hopefully more people will have examples of how they've used it and maybe share some stuff and things like that. But yeah.
Cool. Awesome.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to give us the lowdown on NX and where it's heading. And I look forward to learning more about it.
Definitely. It's been fun. I really appreciate it. This is I think our third interview, huh? That we've done together in this interview format.
Over 3 years now. So I'm sure I'll have more questions for you. Keep coming up with all of this cool stuff to interview you about. I don't think it's going to finish. So
awesome.
I look forward to the next one.
Yeah. And then you can follow me on Twitter. I spend a lot of time on there in terms of communication. So I'm just at Schwarty, SCHWARTY.
Cool.
So I like talking dev and interacting and sharing Angular content and stuff. So if anybody wants to reach out, hit me up on there.
Thank you very much, Justin.
All right, you too.